Hello.
Hello. Morning.
Good morning. Good morning, both of you. Well, it's good to be back,
David.
This was actually planned. I didn't want to break the bad news to you, but a couple of weeks ago, Chris, I had an email from the Diocese inviting me to the residential pre-retirement course.
Excellent.
I know.
Yes.
When I got this said request, which I thought was very good, and when they invited me a couple of years ago, I said bit earlier, but I'd contact me again, and they did, and I accepted one of the two dates, or I said which date I preferred of the two they do each year, because they're regional, they're done regionally, but at Salem College.
That's
and it's
good.
residential for you and your good lady wife or partner or whatever you may have, and so I thought suddenly that a bit of what do you call it, pre-planning for retirement. So I thought I ought to, start to slowly reduce my input into most things.
Oh, God. So is it beginning?
Boris Johnson has resigned.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, he can resign, but he's still Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Yeah, he still has to be. He has to wait now. He has to wait. The Conservative Party people do what they do, I guess. There we are. Anyway.
That'll date our Rev Chat now.
Yeah, that'll date what I think you do. So the pre-retirement thing is now, the date I asked for, which was the March as opposed to September, because the September dates looked like they could possibly be around our holiday times. I was told by Sue Chandler that sadly the March ones for next year were booked up, but I could do the year after. So I said, that'll do me fine. Thank you very much. So a bit of this, it's got a name, hasn't it? I mean, it's not pre-planning, but the name of getting ready, preparing to go. So the longest retirement in history could begin.
Oh, no. I don't think I could bear it.
The longest. Oh, yes. No. I think Jo will need to do this PCC meeting just to get her into the
Get me into the groove. I'm looking at after it.
That's right, yeah, that's right. So I didn't want to break it to you then, Chris, but there was planning. There was pre-planning in this absence, or I'd actually got other meetings which I couldn't get out of.
You went to the dentist, you told me.
I went to the dentist last week, and the week before, wasn't it the Scout Hut meeting?
It was.
Wasn't the Scout Hut meeting? Yeah.
Anyway,
Was that
how are you, Chris?
disguise, was it? Retiring is as bad as pulling teeth?
Mm.
I don't know. I'd rather retire than go to the dentist.
But of course, when you go to the dentist, as we did last week, it's not the pain I fear. It's the pain of the cost that I fear. But the dentist who we saw for the second time then told us that we left it with her last today. And so you just get used to it, don't you, of these people, and they disappear again.
Bit like vicars.
Yeah, they are.
Just get used to us and then we disappear.
Except that most of the dentists I see seem to be younger than vicars.
Well, that's true.
Well, that's because you're just talking about retirement. Anybody older will have retired.
That's very true, because they've earned a lot of money, so they can afford to.
Let's move on. Let's talk about something else.
Yeah, well, talking about retirement, today's reading's got absolutely nothing to do with that.
No, it hasn't at all.
No dentist.
No, or even Boris Johnson. Actually, I think I could make it fit to Boris Johnson, but we'll wait and see. Shall we have our pause?
A reading from Luke 10, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbour as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbour?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while travelling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise."
I had a reenactment of this a couple of weeks ago. Well, not quite. I drove in to Beaminster early on a Sunday morning to do the 8 o'clock. And as I drove just before, just around Buglers, on the left was a car that had crashed. And it had obviously crashed in the night or the evening before, because as I drove past it at 7:20, it had that police tape, around the back of it. And there was no hint of it having just happened. It was, something had happened before. So I drove into Beaminster, it was all fine. Anyway, it got to the 8 o'clock, and another chap arrived at church just before the service, who comes in from Broad Windsor as well, so who would have driven along the same road. And I said to him, "Oh, good morning, how are you?" "Oh, well." He said, "Well, I'm very concerned." He said, "Actually, I'm not sure I should even be here." And I said, "Oh, why? What's the problem?" He said, "Well, I drove past a car crash as I came into the town, and there were people standing around, and I should have stopped to check they were okay. And now I'm worried that I didn't stop, and I don't know whether I should go back or not." And I said to him, "Oh, don't worry, it's fine. You can it happened earlier, and there may be people there now, but they haven't just been injured or anything," because we discussed where it was, and it turned out it was the same car that I'd seen earlier. So I said, "Oh, no, I think you're fine, because I think it happened overnight, and maybe the people have just come back to survey the wreckage." And then he sat down, and then we looked at each other. He said, "The priest has just told me it's okay to not stop at the site of a car crash." He said, "Are you just living out the Good Samaritan and not doing exactly what the priest does in this story, not stop?" But I think we were fine that time. But yeah, it made me giggle, because I thought, no, you're absolutely right, because I've just basically said, yeah, don't worry about it. Passing by on the other side, perfectly okay. So there we are. That's my Good Samaritan story, or my not Good Samaritan story.
Nice, isn't it? David can't interrupt us because he's on mute.
He's muted himself, yeah.
Yeah.
Did your phone ring again?
No, it didn't. I'd blow my nose, and I didn't think you need to hear it. But if it helps with your conundrum, I passed same said car about 8:30 on Saturday night.
Ah. And had it just crashed? Or
No, because there was blue tape around it.
Oh, there you go. So none of us were passing at the opportune time.
No, there was blue tape. So yeah, it's one of those wonderful stories, because again, at the famous Satellites Club that I used to run to as a child, we used to reenact these Bible stories. That was always one we liked to reenact, because I always liked to be one of the robbers that had beaten the man up. We took it back to its core basis, Always seemed a good thing to do.
it's very challenging. I think the trouble with this story is that we can see it on one level as just be kind to people, which is at one level is exactly what it's about. But there's so many layers to it about prejudice and racism and people who hold positions of authority and then don't live up to the positions of authority they have. It's very clear that Jesus is trying to teach this lawyer something more than just about loving your neighbour, but trying to expose some of the inequalities in the life that they're living, perhaps.
I mean, we almost come across, what am I trying to say? We're almost in today's society, it's almost easier to walk by on the other side now and assuming it's somebody else's job. Because we have an ambulance service, we have a police service and a fire service, and we're just there, and it's easy to assume, it's somebody else's job to sort out this problem. We leave it to somebody else. And I just think that, sometimes we do need to stop and check that somebody else is actually doing it, rather than everybody leaving it to somebody else and then nobody doing it.
And of course, it's the unexpected person, isn't it? So the fact that the chap's a Samaritan, which would have made it the shocking story in the context, because the Samaritans were culturally disregarded and prejudiced against and not seen as anything worthwhile. So the hero of the story is someone they despise. And that's the bit I struggle with is this story, because I think, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sad to reveal that I am thoroughly prejudiced. And there are people in the sphere of my life that I find it difficult to love. Let's start with people who oppose women's ministry. Okay, there we are. So if my parable of my Samaritan said, and the person who was forward in faith, or, someone who was anti-women in the church, who I find it sometimes quite hard to get along with and love, he was the hero of the story, then that's where it starts to challenge me personally, doesn't it? Because actually now I'm going to have to be inspired and model my life with somebody who I find difficult to be the hero. And that's quite challenging.
And isn't that going to be reciprocated? As in, if you look at it from the other guy's point of view, the same if you look at it from the Samaritan's point of view, I'm going to struggle recognising that a woman or one of the Jewish Israelites is the person who's going to help out. Because that's what we naturally do. As in, and that's not a bias against any particular order. It's I often call it a bias against different. And, and it's not just different that supports, but different that opposes. Yeah. And therefore we, if we don't like different, we don't like X because they don't support women's ministry, and we don't like them back in return because they do support women's ministry.
Absolutely.
And therefore we both think the other can't do any good. Yeah.
And we can swap in,
whatever descriptor
whichever description we want. Yeah.
I mean, it was I just recently did, I think last week, as part of school governor training, a subconscious bias test. And the problem was I spent the whole time trying to work out what button I was to press on the computer.
So were you subconsciously biased?
Yeah, probably. I was. I'm subconsciously racist, apparently. Put up a picture of a black person and then the word good, and you had to press the same button. And if you put up a black person and the word bad, you had to press a different button, and then they change it around. And I was permanently looking at the pictures and thinking, what's that? Now, what does it say on the instructions I've got to do here? And it measured your time for the response.
So it may not be that you were
just not clever enough to read the instructions and comprehend them quick enough.
Nothing to do with bias, but just apparently you can't use a keyboard well enough, or whatever it might have been.
Yeah. It was the coordination from reading instructions on the display to working out where the right button was on the keyboard.
David.
Yeah, I was listening very carefully, just wondering what any of that had got to do with the story of the Good Samaritan, and thinking that, of course, the pressing of buttons on the keyboard Well,
Okay.
yeah, but of course, your dilemma is that if you were driving into Beaminster one Sunday morning and you saw a car crash and it happened to be the Bishop of Ebbsfleet, would you stop and help him, or would you not stop and help him?
No, but that's not the point, because the Samaritan isn't the victim. The Samaritan is the hero.
No, you're being the Samaritan, you see, or the priest. You could be the priest. You could walk past and ignore him.
Of course I'd stop. Of course I'd stop. If I was the first person on site of a car crash, regardless of whether it was Bishop of Ebbsfleet or not, I would. But the point I was making is that Jesus is using the hero. He's choosing a difficult image as a hero for us to struggle with, because that's the point.
Take it back a second, because I think that for me the story has always been about the fact that you've got the priests and you've got the holy people. They're passing by because they're adhering to the law and their passion for God. In doing that, they misread altogether what God is saying. But to them, it's not that they don't care about the wounded man, because we don't know what they do or what they don't. But all we know is that they're worried to death that if they touch him, they won't be allowed to fulfill the task they've got to do when they get to the temple later.
We don't know that either, though. That's us projecting. We don't know why they passed by, because it doesn't say because they were fearful of being unclean. They passed by. Whether that's out of good intent or bad intent, they don't stop.
That's true.
They might have just been scared that the same would happen to them.
That's another thing, yes, that's another good point. But then you've got the Samaritan who just disregards the rules and the laws and gets stuck in, doesn't he?
Mm. And it's an act of outrageous kindness as well, because he not only does he stop, but then he shoves him on his donkey and takes him to the inn and bandages him up and leaves the money for his ongoing care. So it's not even just a stopping to see you're okay. It's a level of generosity that takes us into, new realms. So there's something here about loving our neighbour might be costly and might inconvenience us and might require more of us than we're prepared to give.
It's interesting, because when I read the other readings that go with it, because we're starting two new series of readings, aren't we, to go alongside the Gospels from Luke at the moment. This week, I think it's Colossians and Amos, which we've got that before. And I think that this particular story links very much into what is Paul's worldwide gospel, which rejoices. And it's about for me, it's about the orientation of the heart towards God and what we're being asked by God to do, and not misinterpreting it or thinking that it's too important that we try and do for God and we ignore the other bits that he tells us to do.
And what that might mean for our churches.
Yeah.
How we love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind and strength as people of faith. And how do our churches love God, but also how do they love our neighbours? So how do our churches love our neighbours? And what kind of generosity and service do we display as Christians, as a community of Christians within a community?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Which is why I found myself with the address for the online worship on Sunday, tying some of this story into the bishop's story of his talents and the £10 note, because the generosity I've been shown already with donations to make that fund grow to create something that we can help people in need at a later time was very important. And I think there is this thing about goodness and what our heart tells us we should do as Christians, how we do love. What does it mean to love our neighbour?
Yeah.
And ourselves as well, of course, So, yeah, good readings.
Indeed. So, thank you for joining us and wrestling with the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's interesting when we get to the familiar stuff, isn't it? And then have to kind of unpick it for here and now. So, excellent. You can find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. We're everywhere. the Egerton and Colmers Benefice and Beaminster Area Team. But you can, we'll hopefully be back for next week for Rev Chat, unless one of us have retired in the interim.
I'll just check my diary, see if I've got any other important business next Thursday. What will be the date next Thursday?
You're putting out the bins.
Could be. Can tell you now. I've got to do a wedding licence at 9:30. I might just get it in time.
We'll have to be brief. No viewer will ever be sad that we're quicker.
It's one for the Bride Valley, I'm afraid.
Well, lovely to see you all. Take care. See you again. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.